I'm presenting a couple times, so you'll get to see a lot of me. I am in what my sister calls my undercover Barney costume because I'm wearing purple and I have green, also a green belt. I'm going to take the lei off in case it interferes with the mic, but now you should be able to remember my name, at least my last name. My first name is pretty common too. So I am here to talk about WordPress for law student organizations, standardizing customizations. This is the presentation page on the website. For the recording, I have no idea if I'm going to be on the recording or if that's going to be on the recording or both, but the slides and the handout are already linked on that page, so I will refer to them at different times, but you can go there and get it anytime. So with no further ado, it is 2:30. I will move into the presentation itself. And I was very happy to have a room computer because I'm using an online presentation tool. Now let's see if I can use this wireless mouse to open it. There we go. All right. Yes, slidebean.com is now in full screen. Okay, here we go. Standardizing WordPress customizations. So that sounds like I'm going to get into all kinds of codey stuff with WordPress, and maybe some of you are like, I like WordPress, but I don't know PHP. Am I going to be able to use any of this? Yes, yes you are, because I'm actually going to talk about strategy more than anything else. My handout has a lot of code examples. Even if you don't read PHP, it's all inline commented. And I'm going to turn on comment access to the handout after the session. So if you want to start copying and pasting it and using it, you can go in there and add a comment on the document if something doesn't make sense or doesn't work, and we'll be able to respond to you. Word of warning, this is my second conference in 2 weeks. I'm also an organizer for WordCamp Chicago. So I'm taking a few days off after Cali, so don't expect an immediate response if you get into the handout and you're like, I want to use this immediately. I'll get to it, I promise, but it might be a week. So why are you here? This would be very helpful for me to gauge the room. How many of you are using WordPress personally for any purpose? Okay, so most of you have at least seen what the back end looks like and so forth. How many of you are planning on using WordPress for students at your school? Okay, a few of you, or at least considering it. Let me see, did I have other questions? Does anybody want to tell me what you want to learn, or are you just here for the ride? Have any specific things I should make sure to cover? All right, you're here for the ride. So, in the past, we had all kinds of problems with our student organization websites. They kind of look like this. You guys probably have seen a lot of the last remaining things that are in HTML that don't look pretty, that are on your server somewhere, and student organizations are one of the things that ends up like that because, well, lots of reasons. For example, it's difficult for students to update content. Why? Because the designs are difficult to change. They're in HTML and CSS, and probably somebody a few years ago downloaded some template and started changing it, and now you've got somebody else who never had any introduction to it. Also, admin access is limited. For our IT staff, you know, they only have so many hours in the day, and giving them access to live servers is not their favorite thing in the world. So that means that it definitely has to be on campus. There's security issues with giving them access to these servers and letting them do stuff. And the number one reason that these sites don't get updated and look crappy is because there was nobody to offer training in how to do websites, especially not HTML and CSS websites, and support if something breaks was pretty limited. So really, you had no student buy-in. So I started going through the student organization websites pretty early on to look at that and come up with different goals. So here's our roadmap for what we really want it to be. We want sites that work for students. This should mean that they have quick access, because if we want them to update it, it shouldn't be a pain in the neck for them to get into it. We want there to be easy training, and they shouldn't have to learn code if they don't want to. If somebody is, more techie and really wants to customize it, I have no problem with working with them individually. But in general, this should be easy access. We wanted to use existing tools. This wasn't something that we were prepared to give the students access to the law school CMS that runs the rest of our website. It would require a lot of customization to meet some of their goals. And WordPress for us is a very easy way to do kind of one-off sites. And I was already supporting it for the law school faculty blogs, faculty project pages, things like that for staff and faculty. And clean, modern designs. This is not to say that we didn't want everything to be branded the exact same way. Student organizations serve a lot of different purposes. We wanted to give them a sense of like, this is what our organization is, this is how it should look and feel, with some standardization in terms of, hey, this is on our site, we don't have to look terrible. So why is WordPress our solution? Well, like I said, I'm pretty active with WordPress. WordPress is great because you can get into it very quickly, and there's a lot of friendly people who are involved. I definitely recommend, if you are on your own with WordPress in your organization, or you just want to kind of level up, check out WordCamps. They are really, really cheap. Our one was $60 for 3 days of instruction. That included food and more t-shirts than I could wear in a week because of our sponsors and a lot of great things like that. So WordCamps are really open source conferences. Rather than having an organization like Cali sponsoring it, they have one person that works for Automatic, the company behind WordPress.com that creates some of the core code, who supports people, but it's all volunteer run. So I really recommend that if you are getting into stuff like this. A lot of the things that I'm talking about I've learned in the last couple of WordCamps, and the last one was last weekend, and I'm already seeing more ways that I want to customize this. I didn't have time to include them in my slides, but if you contact me, I'll tell you about it. For instance, last year, one of the great presentations that I went to was by a woman named Stephanie Leary, and I'll mention her again in a second, but she recommended this book. So I went out and got it through the library and read it a couple times, and it's definitely worth it. It's not a very long book. If you're taking on a new project, like running something like student organization websites, that you really want to make sure you keep the work limited to something that's doable. This is a great way to get started. It goes by a lot of different names, honestly. It could be information architecture, it could be content strategy, it could be content modeling. It's basically the same idea, but that's a nice entry-level book. This is a quote from wpmudev.org, which I'll mention again later because they're a really good support site. Let me see if I can use the laser pointer here. So, content model for the type and range of content you're publishing will dramatically improve your site's flexibility and provide a superior experience for both of you, the site owner and your visitors. So, for me, it's not the site owner and the visitors, it's the site host, manager, and the users, the students. But of course, we also want it to be good on the other end. So, Stephanie Leary gave a presentation at WordCamp last year. She works in I think for Texas A&M, doing WordPress customization for universities there. So she's very familiar with the higher ed side of things. If you want to check out her blog, she had a really nice post that's in the handout if you want to read both of these articles that these come from. So her content strategy steps were evaluate all of the stuff you're getting into, analyze it, structure what you're seeing, and then you have to get into actually fixing it to go into a system and maintaining it. So I went out there and I took her presentation to heart and I evaluated all the student organization websites. And granted, I purposefully made this super rainbow and crazy because this is not what I used. This was just to get an overview of all the types of content that could possibly be in a student organization website. Some of this is stuff that was already out there. Some of it was stuff that as I started poking at it, I was like, oh, and then you could do this and that would be awesome. But wait, take a step back. What are our priorities for this goal? Don't get ahead of yourself. When you're taking on a new project like this, you don't want to be one of those people who's super enthusiastic and super thorough and has everything in thought in mind, and then it turns out all your work is kind of pointless because you don't have people who want to use that sort of complicated system. So, what are our priorities? Match the students' goals. Figure out what those are, and don't go crazy. Simplify the editing process, because our number one problem was that they weren't getting edited, and improve the design. So this is what I think is really important for student buy-in, is you need to make sure that it does what they want it to do, that it's easy to use, and that the end result is something that they're proud of. So this is really my goal. I have to think about it as a service to the students, not as, hey, look, aren't I great that I gave you access to this tool? Nobody cares about the tool itself. What they care about is, are they getting their goals met? So here is a simplified version of that. It's got 4 basic, let's say, tabs on the website. And within that, some of these get a little bit more complicated, but not terribly. And then when I thought about the organization separate from the journals, I decided, hey, for the journals, they get another tab, and that would be like the actual journal content. So that's my after analysis. So what did I do with all that stuff that I threw out, that whole huge complicated thing? I'm not thinking about this as wasted effort going through and looking at all those things. I still have that content map. And if one of the organizations came to me and said, hey, it's really important for us that we turn this into almost like an event management. We're going to have so many events and we want to have so many details in our website, blah, 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 blah. That was one of those big columns that I had looked at. Or if I look at it and say, hey, it'd be great if we had an events subset, just like the student organizations, for all the things that are happening at Chicago Kent. I could still take a lot of that thinking that I've done and turn it into something later. So recycle whatever you're going to throw out, don't trash it. And this, again, is not important. Like I said, there is a handout that goes into a lot more detail, but just to show you the kind of work that went next into structuring it, I had a sense of what types of content were there, but then I had to figure out, where does this go? Is this something that I want to use the default things for, or do I want to start playing with it? So same thing, there's the journal with structure notes. And again, you guys already have access to the slides, so don't feel like you need to jot everything down. So first of all, if you're not familiar with WordPress, what comes standard out of the box? What do you not need to customize? Basic content is posts, which are the things that are updates, and they're always organized with the most recent one first, so everything can get shifted down as you change the date. Pages, which is static content, so that would be something like an About Us page or maybe a contact form that you never want to move. You always want it to be there. You might want to edit it from time to time, but you're just updating it. You're not changing it. Taxonomies, which is a way of filtering all of your posts. So if you want to do it by topic or type of information or whatever is going on with your site. And attachments. And attachments is the one type of default content that we really ended up fiddling with, especially for our journals, because attachments are really optimized for images. WordPress started off as blogging software. I would not say that's where it ended at all. It's really moving into being a CMS, but still, if you're working with a lot of PDFs or Word documents or something like that, you're going to find that it's kind of limited. So I'll show you what we did to customize that. But here's a few examples to get started. This is a sandbox site that isn't live yet, but I have the link for it in the handout. Just a basic announcement. I grabbed a news release for this organization because everything on their site had ended in like 2009 and posted it in there to show them how nicely new content could fit into their system. This is one of our brand new organizations. They have an about page. It doesn't have to look very complicated, but it's a decent looking page, I think. And this is one of our journals that recently decided to add a new type of content to their page after we got it transferred over. They want to do author profiles. So it's a little bit hard to tell on this one, but it has a block of text at the top and then it has a couple posts underneath. So when you had somebody come in who is a really nationally well-known speaker, they're able to put up a profile for her, and if they had more speakers that they wanted to talk about, they could introduce why they're doing speaker stuff and then have them underneath. So that's without us doing anything coding behind the scenes. That's just telling them, hey, you could use it to do this. So what did we customize? Well, first of all, I didn't customize everything. I want to introduce you to my team, which is Kim Coppin and Trupti. Trupti especially is a rock star. I love being able to hire student programmers. She's in our finance program actually at IIT, but she has years of background in PHP. I can deal with PHP, but I'm kind of like a immigrant learning a second language. I can read it, I can translate it, I can't write it beautifully. So she's really good at looking at the documentation for the examples that I find and saying, okay, here's how we're going to tweak it. And the stuff that she's worked on, like I said, it is in the handout, so you guys can copy that too. So you also, even if you're at the same level as me, where you're like, I can sort of understand the logic, but don't expect me to write new functions. Let me give credit where credit's due. WordPress custom content. So what are the easiest types of custom content to do in WordPress? You can do custom posts, which keeps the basic default post for things like announcements or whatever separate for some other type of content that you want to be able to sort or, gather together. Custom taxonomies. Again, if you have that custom content and you want to organize it in its own section apart from the rest of your posts. And meta fields. These three things are what we've used for the most part, besides doing a few custom templates, which aren't drastically different than normal WordPress content. And we're using a plugin called Super CPT. Again, all the links are in the handout. We're using it, you can get into the WordPress codex, which is where they have all of their code defined and explained, and lots of nice examples. If you're in WordPress, definitely try reading the codex. Even if you're not a programmer, you'll find that it's a lot easier to read than you expect, because there's all these helpful people that want to introduce people to this, and they write really nice explanations. So you can get into the codex and learn how to, on your own, create custom posts and custom taxonomies. The fields are something that isn't as easy to do. So I'll get into that with some examples in a second. Why bother? Why not just use the custom stuff, and if they want to do something, you just figure out a way around it without ever getting into code? Here's why. Example number 1, student organization. This is our SBA. I would say most of you probably have an SBA at your school. I don't know if yours is as complicated as ours, but we have an executive board up here, and we have a general assembly here, and then we have all of the committees down here. And people are pretty active in a lot of different ways, and this is a complicated page. And if they had to edit that manually, there's a good chance that something would get broken. They would forget where somebody goes. They want to update this within a semester, not just once a year. They change committee members around fairly frequently. All right. One thing that's nice is I've got it enabled so it can use thumbnails if we have that. It's a featured image thing that is built into WordPress. So when we click on executive board, now the thumbnails appear, which is nice. Or I couldn't put pictures in the previous page because people's names show up a million times and it would just make the page impossible to look at. And now we click over to an individual profile, and you can see the picture. It's not the thumbnail, it's the picture that's embedded in the post. So you can kind of scroll down. Why is this great? Because all of it, from the editor point of view, I'll say editor member for the organization, is really just one page here. So all they have to do is start filling things in. So let me see if I can use the laser pointer. So we've got the default. This is just like a post. It's got a title, it's got text, it's got the featured image. What we've added here is a custom taxonomy for positions. So he's on the executive board and he's the president. If you would scroll down in this box, you would find all the other committees. He's not on a lot of other committees, so you're not seeing it at the moment. Graduation year is a field that I added for my own purposes because I would really like to know about the turnover in these organizations. I don't always get that information from people, but we have a new policy in place, thank God, that says if an organization isn't updated in 3 years, I can archive the website, because I don't want to have to keep supporting websites forever if they're not using them. So that'll help me get a sense of, is anybody here still using this? And semester year. The one thing I don't love about custom taxonomies is you can't really have a relationship between them. So I can't say that Sasha was the president in 2013 to 2014. If I had somebody who was the secretary in 1 year and then became the president in the next year, which is the case, she couldn't have both things on her name. She would need to just say formerly secretary 2013 to 2014 and then say president 2014 to 2015. So I don't think it's a deal breaker because they have one profile. What about all that editing with that giant list of committees that everybody's on? Well, they also have a quick view. So this is all of the different names. I blurred things out just so that you guys can focus on what's important. But if you click on quick edit, then you've also got those boxes. You don't have to open up each page. So when they're reassigning committee members, they click on here, they click on a name and they say, hey, you're now in this committee, and they click update, and then they go to the next name and they go through it. And it's a very fast process for them. So everything is entered as minimally as possible, and it can show up multiple times on the website. So that's why these customizations matter, is because it makes it much easier to keep it up to date. It makes it work exactly the way that they want it to, and you don't have as many problems in between. So here's an example again for a journal. This is our IP journal, and this is the list of all of the issues. Okay, and then this is a table of contents for one issue. It's got 2 different volumes in here, and it is using a table. That's what they wanted. And then this is an individual article. So I mentioned that attaching PDFs is not something that WordPress does beautifully. You could click over to the PDF and it would open up separately, but you wouldn't normally get something like this. We've added custom fields again for the author and the issue and the pages in here, and people can download it if they want to, or they can scan through. So I'll mention what tools we're using for this later. So from the editor's view, how did all that get created? Actually, it's just on the media page. And I had to do a little bit of customization, like I said, but really when I thought about it, what's the core piece of content for a journal? It's the articles. That's what they're spending all of their effort on. If I can make it so that all they have to do is edit the article information as they put it up, it's as tied to the real thing as possible. All that other stuff is created from the articles. So this is where they create that table of contents and the volume issue. As soon as they check those things off and update it, it shows up on those pages. If they are adding a new volume, the only tricky thing I found is that they have to upload the entire issue in the order that they want it to appear because it's hard to reorder things.
So
Yes?
you customized it rather than getting a journal page?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because what we wanted to do was make all of this code something that we can plunk into as many themes as we want to. So that's what I mean by standardizing customizations. So I will show you some of that. So we've got right here the fields, and we made that super easy for people to enter. We have another plugin that we're using to replace media because it does link to that PDF file page, like the ID for it. So you don't want them, and this happened with this journal, we had to switch it around. Yes?
Going back to the SBA board, do you receive a request where they want to have each year's board be listed?
Oh yeah, it's automatically listed.
So it archives each year?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
And it'll just push it down. Yeah, that was absolutely part of our plan. We wanted every organization to...
Secretary 1 year and then...
Right, they would move to the most recent year, which is why I said they'd need to put in the description what their position was in the past.
Okay.
Because it wouldn't appear in both places, because they would have both positions and both years listed, which would be confusing.
Sure.
So really, I figured for students, what they want is to feel like, hey, if I put all this effort into putting a profile on a website, I'm going to be able to use that on my resume later. I'm going to be able to link to my profile that'll have a description of me and it'll be on this website. And so that's really how I've been marketing it. And I see that, glimmer in their eyes. They're like, yes, that's what I want. Appeal to people's egos, it matters. So again, we're trying to make this as easy as possible for the journals. They put in a description. Caption would be used for images usually. So a few of these things are custom fields that we added. This is a plugin that lets us do that. To see categories on a media page is another plugin because that's not normally a part of the media. Again, you can organize your posts all you want to, but you can't organize your media normally, but we're trying to find ways to do that. So to match your question about customization, yes?
How are you handling hosting and the name servers?
I do all the hosting.
So it's unboxed?
Yeah. And I work with our IT department to do that, and I have another plugin that lets me do it. Yeah. So choosing a theme. You're asking, is this all built into finding one theme? Well, I'm finding a theme and deciding whether it's going to be easy for me to customize. So the first thing I do is I check the author, and by and large, I'm using themes that are designed by the WordPress people because I know it's always going to have standardized code. So if I'm trying to figure out how to change something, if I look at the documentation, I know it's going to work the way the documentation says it should work. That just makes my life easier. There's a lot of them out there that are designed by the Automatic team. Automatic is the name of the company. WordPress.org is the one that makes like the 2011, 2012 default themes that you find when you install WordPress. The other ones are installed on WordPress.com. But if you look for Automatic, I just think that's the easiest way to get started. If I'm not choosing Automatic, then I double check to see on the theme repository what kind of support questions are out there, how often they're updating it. If they're updating it when there's new things available in WordPress, that matters to me. And I check the templates, I'll show you how to do this, to see if the ones that I want to copy and fiddle with are in there, so it's a lot easier for me to just copy and paste and do a couple lines of code rather than creating stuff. Yes?
Do you ever work with students who design their own templates and HTML?
Not yet. I've got a few students who are like, oh, I use Drupal, but then I show it to them and they're like, oh, this is great, this is so much easier. Because there's a lot of things you can customize within a theme that I can give them access to without giving them access to the themes themselves. At this point, I've worked on enough projects, especially for faculty things, that when somebody chooses a theme that doesn't work this way, I already know it's going to be more work for me, so I'm going to limit it to the pool of ones that work for me.
So is it locked that the student couldn't change the theme?
I have a sandbox site on one server that I give them admin access to. They can't install new themes, but they can switch between the ones that are on there that I've installed. When the site is ready to go live, I put them on a different server and I give them editor access, which means that they can change their content, but they can't change the theme. And I explain that to them really early, and I say this is because I don't have a way of authenticating the users against our domain's logins, and I don't want to manage 1 million users. So I give them one account per organization, because that way they decide who has access to the site. I don't. I decide what roles they have on the site, so I know what they can do, but I don't decide which person it is doing that. And I offer training to them in groups or however they want to handle it, which, you know, in the future I might find that that doesn't work for. So far, I don't have a huge number of student organizations that I'm working with. I'm still trying to market this to more of them. It's one of our big summer projects, but this is what's working fine for us. And then some organizations do want something with custom features. So one of them came in with a theme that had like a slider. I don't think sliders are the best thing in design, because if you have like 20 of them and you want people to click on everyone, nobody goes to a website and clicks on every slider. They see the first one or two, but it's not an action thing. It's a nice design thing for looking at pictures, but you don't actually get a lot of information out of it because it usually goes right by before you finish reading it. So there's some stuff like that that I'll talk to them and be like, well, you can do it. I'll find you a theme that does it, but here's the result. So I try to, you know, give them some idea of what's the best choice, but whatever. So creating a child theme. I find a theme and then I customize it. I don't start from scratch because I'm not a full-time designer. I'm not a full-time programmer. I don't have time for that. What do you need to create a child theme? If you're not a programmer, you don't need to be any of those things to get started on this. It really is very simple. And doing it this way means that you don't change any of the core code. If some update comes along, you can just update the theme and your changes don't get lost. So really, really don't ever edit an original theme that you downloaded. It'll just create all kinds of problems for yourself. And P.S., if you're downloading a theme, get it from the WordPress repository. Don't go out there and start Googling for themes, because there are so many out there that are crappy code. Or that's why I said check authors. Do it through the repository. Really, really. Once or twice I've gotten something from somewhere else and I've tested it, but you have to have a lot of work to do that. Yeah?
To add to crappy code, you also mean there's malware in
Oh, yeah.
themes. So be careful.
WordPress, by the way, runs 22% of the web. That's awesome. That means so many people want to get in there and screw with you. So be careful where you get stuff. The repository really does have a lot of people that are going through the code to try to make it as safe as possible. So you need a style sheet. It's very simple code. You go in there and you say, this is the parent theme, this is my name for the theme, this is my name, period, so you can search for things that you did. Or, you know, if I have different people in a team, on my team working on it, they can put their name on it so I remember who made the changes. A functions file is where you'll copy and paste the things to make custom posts. An archive is where you can create that list of like multiple repeating things. So for instance, the SBA list of officers or the list of journals, things like that. And this goes by different names and different things, but it's the individual profile page. And if you need it, if you're doing something with like PDFs and so forth, then you might want an attachment page. So my handout goes into more detail about that. How do you find out if those things are available? When you're in the themes directory, and this is on WordPress.org, with this specific theme, if you click on the developers tag, again, you don't have to be a developer to do this, but you click on it and you click on SVN, and that will give you this page, and then you can just check to see if those things are in there, and you can click on it to look at the code if you're somebody who likes getting into the code. So doing that will save you a lot of time and hassle later on. So that's themes. I have mentioned plugins. Plugins add functionality to your website. So how do you choose a plugin? There's a lot of them out there sometimes to do the same functionality. So first of all, I like to use a plugin that has good documentation, because like I said, I'm not a designer, I'm not a programmer. I want to know that I can figure out how to use this thing. Do they know how it's used? Do they know what kind of problems come up? Do they have examples that I can copy in case my student graduates? You want to check the support tab to see how often people have problems and how much they're responding to it and whether there are updates. Reviews vary. You don't get as much information on that, and sometimes somebody installs it and really doesn't know what they're doing, and it's just like, it doesn't work straight up. Well, did you read the instructions? I don't know. And the author's activities. You can click on the author's name to see how many other things they're doing and whether they're responding to questions and if they're active. So that's a useful thing. Using plugins. Number one, if you like a plugin but there's something you want to tweak about it. For instance, that table of contents thing that's in a table, we wanted it to look a certain way to match their old site. We had to copy it. And that means that if that plugin gets updated, we don't get those updates in the thing. We have to go back to look at that and add our stuff back in. So that's a little bit of a tweak. Most of the plugins I don't use, I would never bother to do something like that because they don't mess with display. Network activated versus individually. We're using multi-site for WordPress, which makes our lives easier. It means you just have to click to add a new site in seconds, and I don't have to manage a million separate installations every time I need to update something. I can network activate plugins. I have one plugin that I use that helps me keep track of where I'm doing that. But for instance, if I'm building all of my themes to use this custom posts thing, and that's a plugin, I want it network activated. So if a student goes in there and turns something off, like number one, they can't change that. If it's network activated and I give them admin access, they can't change the network activated one. So they can't break their sites if something's dependent on it. Individually is if you find somebody who really wants to do this one random thing that nobody else is doing, that's fine, but you have to tell them you need to leave that on. Most of my students have never gone into these settings. One or two of them is like, hey, I'm an awesome person who knows how to do stuff. They also can't install plugins, FYI, or uninstall them. So like I said, you do have to keep in mind, if you're using some of this code, you're gonna wanna have them activated, and you might need to know a little bit more programming if you don't network activate them, because you might realize, oh, it's looking for something that isn't there and it just broke. So network activate if you're going to use them in themes is my advice. Basic plugins. We always have these turned on. Spam. Hey, it's WordPress. It has comments. If you turn it on and you don't realize that you left comments available, there are these lovely spam bots that like to crawl the internet looking for things to put links into. So turn that on. You can network activate it, by the way. Use some sort of security thing. Like I said, 22% of the web means everybody's trying to get into your site. There's a lot of bots that go around checking for the login page and so forth, and this is a good one. The guys who write it and support it are pretty active in the WordCamp community too, giving back, so they're very friendly, helpful people. A lot of these have paid upgrades. I'm working with the free ones at this point, not having a problem. And multi-site enhancements is one that I mentioned because I'm using multi-site. It helps me keep track of where themes are turned on and a few things that aren't default. It's only on the admin. It won't slow your site down or anything like that. Used for organizations. Super CPT helps us do the custom post types. Category order and taxonomy terms order means that if they later decide, hey, I have a secretary of web design and I'm going to add it in, it doesn't show up in their list of officers above the president. So it lets them reorder how that shows up on the page. So if they decide their hierarchy is always changing and I'm using categories, normally it's in order by when it was created. This gives them a nice simple drag and drop interface. And same thing for journals if they needed to. And Jetpack is created by the people at Automatic to support WordPress.org custom installations with a lot of the tools that they custom rolled for WordPress.com. So it has things like stats that the students can see on the site, forms that also creates a nice like custom thing where they can see the feedback on the site or have it emailed to them. There's a number of tools like that, that custom social sharing things if they want to set it up so when they add an announcement it goes out to their Twitter and their Facebook account or has buttons for people to share. A lot of Jetpack has pretty much everything that I use regularly in there. So I mentioned taxonomy terms order. This is what it looks like on the back end. And because I have two taxonomies under officers, I have semester, year, and positions. This means they just have to click on it and move it around. For journals, a few more. They always use the stuff because journals are the base, or organizations, are the base thing. So things like profiles, the editor profiles are just a renamed officer profile. So all that stuff that I just mentioned, this is what I use to create a custom post type for officers and their profiles and move their positions around. Same thing, using that for journals. Just a few extra things for the articles. Media categories, like I mentioned, you can't normally organize your media, so I turn that on. Media replace, like I mentioned, because if they decide they have the wrong version of an article, you don't want them to lose that link that they just promoted everywhere. So they can just say, hey, put in this new file, let's keep it at the same link. Document gallery is what we're using to display the list of automatically updated by category, so that's the volumes and so forth. And Google Docs Embedder is what makes the PDF show up on the attachment page instead of as a just open up the PDF. So what this is using is, all of you have probably opened a Google Doc at some point and you see how nicely it is on the page. It doesn't mean, you don't have to have a Google Drive account. It just goes out there and uses Google software for displaying the document. So that could be used for Word documents and a lot of other things too. So it's a clever plugin. And search everything, because if I'm going to bother to add meta fields for authors and dates and stuff like that, I want people to be able to search on the website for those things. So here's an example of search everything I can turn on. Yeah, go ahead, search my tags. Search my custom taxonomies. Search my attachments and my custom fields. So that's things that I added to that. So I want to make sure that people can use that information. So a lot of these have just simple back-end things. I didn't have to do any code once I had the stuff in the attachment page. All right, so here's where we get into code. What is our process? Again, I'm not going to demo any code right now. I think that's boring. And I think if you want to play with code, you're probably going to want to play with it after you have time to think about it, which is not during a presentation while I'm talking at you. So what is our process? First, outline what you want it to do. Think about it carefully. Think about the ways you might want to change it at some point. Get an idea of everything that it needs to do, and then go out there and look at examples, because other people probably had that idea too. 22% of the web is a lot of the web. If you're doing something that isn't all that crazy, somebody else probably had that idea already. So plugins, sometimes they already exist and they do exactly what you want. If you're not sure, the codex is where you find all the code. And you can look and see if they show you how to do it with built-in stuff, so you don't have to install a million plugins if you want to do something simple. The way that ours work, you have to add something to that functions file so that it shows up on the back end. So if I want to add a custom field for students to start entering stuff in, there has to be a way to do that. And this isn't a lot of code, but it means that something shows up then on the attachments page, or my new custom post type shows up. That's the back end. That's the dashboard. On the front end, after you create that and you've got this stuff, people are putting it in, where does it show up? If you install a basic theme, you're not going to see it, because you have to actually go into the theme files and make a way that says, goes back and calls that and pulls it up so that it's on the website. So these are the ones that I'm using within the themes. Super CPT, I've mentioned several times. There are ones out there that are not these specific plugins that work a lot of the same ways. I like these because I think they're simple, and I think the back end is as intuitive as possible. There are some plugins that do way more than you need, and if it does way more than you need, think about what that does for the interface for your student users. They're not super techy. They don't want to see a million boxes. They want to see just the ones that they need. Super CPT lets you do custom post types, custom meta, and custom taxonomies. And as it says, easy and attractive, it lets me choose like the icon for that on the sidebar. I don't know if you noticed that, but a lot of times if you're doing your own custom post types, you just get another little push pin. Push pin doesn't say a lot to somebody who's not used to using the back end of that. If I can choose a little group of people picture, then they're going to remember, oh yeah, I need to click on that. So even little things like that matter to me when I'm looking at how easy my site is to use. Document Gallery is the one that I'm using to create the table of contents, and Google Docs Embedder is for the individual article. So I've got these sites, I've got them all customized, that's great. Now it's my job to offer training. So how do I do that? Number one, for internal use, I use Google Sites. Debbie and I have a presentation tomorrow that's going to go into a little bit more detail about why we love all things Google. But for Google Sites, I put in things like the contact information for the site, so I remember which student it is. So if I'm not there and Debbie gets a question from somebody, she can look up the documentation and be like, oh yeah, you're not the actual editor. Maybe we should contact the person who is actually putting stuff into this site. A list of the file locations and backups, the kinds of things that are related to the site that I might need to find if something goes wrong. Settings, because if I'm transferring it from the live site or the test site to the live site or back again, I might want to know, did they change the settings at some point? Is that why it's broken, because they got into something on the test site? They can't get into the settings on the live site. And maintenance schedules, I use that a lot for if I have my student worker running updates or something. Documentation for students are Google Documents. I give them, for instance, I found for complicated sites, I just run an outline that I'm working from, and then I start using comments so that I'll post a question in the comment and they can respond, and I get an email update, which is great. The conversation actually starts happening. Tips on common tasks. This makes it easy because Google Docs can be private to one group of users or the account or something like that. I can share it with their organization account, and that person can then use it to transfer the account to somebody else if they need to. And links to external tools. The people who want a slider want to know how to find beautiful images. I give them links to public domain or Creative Commons images, for example. And hey, I maybe should use my own tool. So I also use the root site of the test organization to put up a blog that has tips. And I also use external resources because why should I redo something that everyone else has already done? WordPress.com is the free, anybody can blog without having to host kind of site. They also have a lot of really good basic explanations on their support site. iThemes is one that I ran across recently that has some really nice videos. And we actually pay for access to premium wpmudev.org because it gives us some really nice plugins that we don't have to roll ourselves. And they also have videos that they update, and they make it so that when you pay for it, you can put it into your own site and embed it there. So I've answered a few questions as we go, but does anybody have further questions right now? All right.
Do you have copies of the handout?
Yes, let me show you where you can get that. So, and I'll run through the handout really quickly just in case it looks messy or something. So if you go to the program page, I've got links on here to the slides I just gave you, as well as the handout itself, which is over here. This is what it should look like. If you're not already using add-ons for Google Docs, I recommend turning on table of contents because that makes this long site a little easier to click around in. So there's links to the book and the articles I mentioned. Here's some links to example sites in case you want to poke around on one of them live and see what it looks like. And I put in the types of things that are customized here and links to them on a couple of these sites. And here is the lovely code example. So like I mentioned, it's pretty easy to do a custom theme. Honestly, this is all that you need to do a custom theme. That at the top of a style.css page. So I've got the name, I just have a naming convention for myself. I call it the original theme's name, org, or journal, depending on which way I was customizing it. And I have a lot more explanation in here about why I liked to customize it this way, my name. And these are the only two really required pieces of information. You have to put in the name of the original themes folder there and grab the style sheet from and that's all you need. So that's really easy to get started. If you find a theme and all you want to do is change a color, for example, that's all you need. Yes?
The backend system is running it on a Windows server, Linux?
I am running it on an IIS server. No, I tell WordPress people and they're like, oh, but you can run it on a lot of things. Most people run Apache servers to host WordPress, but it works for me on IIS. Yeah?
So you do the training for the students. Is that something they usually assign to a particular member of their editorial board, or do they ask somebody to volunteer?
It depends. I've had some organizations that wanted the whole organizational leadership thing to show up in a group training so that they could all learn how to do it. I've had people who just stop by. I had, sometimes it's just who's interested in doing it. Sometimes I have to kind of like, hello, are you, anybody listening? Do you want this site? And pester them, which eventually once I get everybody in there, I'm gonna be like just turning sites off if I don't get a response from people. But for now, we're really trying to market this more as a service because like I said, it wasn't really offered as a service before, so I understand why they don't really have any organizational structure for who's in charge of this. Yes?
How does the server back up?
Backups. Well, there's a couple things. I download, before I run any upgrade of like the core code for WordPress, 3.9 to 3.9.1 or whatever, all of those things, although they're pretty safe uploads. I download it from PHPMyAdmin and SQL backup, so I get the entire gobbledygook. I put that on a network. Our IT department runs backups of the network itself. I also, when I'm transferring sites between things, I'm downloading it from the WordPress export tool because that's easier to import again on the live site. So I keep that file on our network drive that's backed up. And hey, after our talk this morning, we also use the Archive It tool from the Wayback Machine, which we have access to for a different project, but they gave me access to for student organizations. So all those crappy old websites that I told them I'm taking down, I've already scanned them and they're in the archive, the Wayback Machine now, even though they're not the kind of sites that normally go in the Wayback Machine for like importance or something. And then I have it scheduled so it'll do that like 4 times a year for the organization. So if I get a student who goes in there and decides, oh, I don't want those historical profiles. I've decided that the old people don't matter. I'm just going to go in there as the editor and delete everything out. If that was a problem, I would have a way of restoring that information, either by sending it to them and being like, this is what it used to look like, what did you do? Or just putting it back up from my own backup files. There are tools out there that let you do this automatically that you have to pay for. Backup Buddy is one that I hear about all the time. Some of them will let you back things up to like Dropbox or something like that if you really want an external thing because you aren't trusting your servers or you're using somebody else's hosting.
Do you filter or moderate the contents of your website?
Not at this point. I'm not getting that much content, so I'm not really worried about it. I do have, and this is something from the WPMU Dev Premium thing, I have a plugin that will let me monitor how often it's being updated and which users are updating it. I'm not seeing that much activity. I mean, honestly, most of these students, law students, believe it or not, are not always in love with technology. Just because they're young doesn't mean they want to run a website. But I do tell them, hey, this runs 22% of the web. There are a lot of people who create attorneys' websites on this. Are you thinking about running a site for yourself? I gave a presentation on kind of website strategy in general, not WordPress specific, for our incubator program that we have for recent grads who are trying to set up shop on their own. So I do think this is a useful skill for students to learn, and I try to talk to them in those terms to say, you're learning something. I'm making it as easy for you as possible, but this is something that you should know how to do. I've got a lot of other code in here. My student worker, who's lovely, went in here and added highlighting to show where we're using stuff from some of these plugins. So if you're not familiar with it and it's just weird, it's lots of steps. And I'm going to go in here now and change the sharing so that anyone who has the link can comment, save. Like I said, I do not promise to respond to the comments right away because it's been a long couple weeks and I'm going to participate in this conference. But you would just click on the comment thing here, select text, and well, I have more tools than you will have because I own it, but you can insert comments somewhere here. Comments. There you go. Comment. Yeah, there we go. So you would do something like that. And then I can respond. I'll get an email when you do that, if you do that. Just as an example, as long as we're still talking for a second, this is the sort of thing that I have on the back end with Google Drive for a student organization. The SBA had tons of things that they wanted edited separately. So I actually used Google Drive's embed feature rather than having it go into their media library. So that it has Google documents that show up on the website instead of PDFs that show up on the website. And the advantage of that is, okay, I've got one person who's in charge of elections. I've got one person who's in charge of financial forms. The forms, for the most part, the deadline is what changes on the document. So I can share access to that whole folder of things. They can go in there and update the document, and it shows up on the website. It also means that if they want an editable thing, a PDF is not very editable. Google Drive, people can download the files if you have it set up that way and edit them themselves or make a copy. So I'm definitely trying to think about what tools are we using and what's the most efficient way. Just because I've got something customized for the journals doesn't mean that it makes sense to continue using the media library for the SBA. If they need their documents to do different things, I'll use a different tool. And if I can use this mouse across the room, this tab is what it looks like on our Google site that we use for internal documentation. So I have a page template that, whether I'm filling it in or somebody else on my staff, it's just put in all this information about what does the menu look like, which plugins are we using, stuff like that. So we can make sure that we're standardizing our own internal information. Other questions? Yes.
Okay, make a comment. All right, I'm the head of the library technology group that I'm a part of, and this may seem like, wow, what a resource-intensive project for an entire group of librarians and staff. But there's a lot of important reasons that we decided this was a very important project for the school. For law schools, there are several main goals now. We want to make sure that our students get skills that they can use in their jobs, and we want to help them get jobs, and we want to make sure that our school is attractive to students. We found out that students were looking at student-ordered websites before they came here to our school, Chicago Penn, and they wrote a handbook and now. So we realized that this was a marketing opportunity.
Yes.
We also have an incubator program of students who are graduates have come back and they're learning, and we've talked to them about WordPress as well. These are an actual tool that the students that we have in our school are going to use in real life. And plus, on a nice looking site, students can point to, I did this in my student organization. Here it is on the record. You can see I did this. You can get more information, something they can tell employers. So this is a project that supports the main goals of the law school and is an important function for the library. You saw that Emily talked a lot about information organization and management, something that we librarians are very good at. So we've been trying to sort of evangelize that this is another way that libraries can serve their users, particularly their students, in a way that's not traditional. It's been a really exciting project. We've got a lot of new student contacts and a lot of new different directions we can now go with the SBA now that we have a good relationship with them. So overall, this project's been very successful in doing things to help the law school and building the library's relationships with students, which is something we want to focus more on going forward. So it's been a great project.
And we're very interested, besides projects like this, in working with helping some of the skills programs. We have a new person coming in to run skills. This is separate from the clinic. It's more kind of, you know, are you ready, prepare to practice kind of stuff. And there's a lot of tech skills in that. We're a library technology group. We have the time and the translation abilities sometimes for technology that our IT department doesn't have time for. So we're trying to build up this service, but that also gives us, like Debbie said, connections with these organizations, because I'm sure any of you that try to offer any kind of workshops to students know it's really hard to get them to show up. And we're finding that if we can get an organization to sponsor it, if we have connections with them and they're able to do more of the social media marketing for us, for example, that helps quite a bit. Of course, even better than that is having a faculty member who's like, no, you got to know this, show up. So we're still figuring out strategies, but offering services that they like, that they can see the value for, is an important first step to getting in the door. The other thing I meant to mention, and I didn't have a chance to, I showed you why you would look for specific templates in a theme. I have handouts. This is a rare thing for Callie, but I picked up these from WordCamp Chicago. And what it is, if you are getting into customizing WordPress at all, this shows the logic that WordPress uses, so that if you click on the home page and the theme is really minimal, you're going to be looking at this PHP file. If you're trying to look for something that might be repeating on a page, it's probably looking at archive, but it might be looking at something else. So it just shows you kind of the logic tree for how a theme structure is connecting to the WordPress software, and it makes it a lot easier. I have this at my desk. I also put a link at the very end of my long handout to where it is on the web. Can I do page down? Yes, I can. Awesome. There's a couple other tools at the very end. I had somebody, Lee Peoples, I think, is a law library director who contacted me because his library is thinking about offering hosting to journals. Oh, come on. Scan down. And he was looking at other people's tools and trying to figure out what they were using. So I put in a couple links here. If you're looking at somebody else's WordPress site and you want to figure out what the heck they're doing, so the theme hierarchy helps you figure out why you would need to use a specific template page. In what situation would it actually be looking for that? Built with will tell you what server and things like that a site is running on. And WP Theme Detector will try to figure out what theme a site is using. So if you really love the way that something looks, you can click on that. But like I said, you might find out that it's like a child theme or a parent theme or something like that. So I am happy to answer more questions. Feel free to contact me. My email is in this handout in a couple spots, because I figured some of the things you might be like, oh, you know what? I don't actually want to do any of that code. Could you just send me your child theme? I will do that. If you don't want to do the code, you'll have to know how to have a WordPress installation where you can install themes. So you can download the parent theme and know how to install one into the file structure in the back end, not using the repository, because child themes don't show up on the repository, but I can send you the files. Yes, Joanna.
So one of the things that John Marshall was that, I don't know if somebody already asked this, but we have an institutional repository, and so we don't really host the journals, but we work with the students, and we also post all of their articles in our IR.
Yeah.
And do you guys is there a relationship there?
What a wonderful question. Yeah, well, I can type when I can't see what I'm doing. Not very well. See if I can pull this up very quickly. But our law review actually is just linking to the IR for all of their articles because our law review has been around for a very long time. And oh, come on. I think that this wireless keyboard is losing power. Yes, definitely. Okay, so anyway, let's see if I can get to the Chicago Kent Law Review. Nope, definitely not. Yeah, okay, it likes about every other letter. Go ahead and Google for the Chicago Kent Law Review, and what you will find is that a lot of the articles, it says go here for the permanent repository, and that's where they're putting the PDFs. They do put things like the abstracts for the newest issue on there, and their website was a very odd one at the beginning of the year. It was something that I absolutely could not tell what their strategy was. I had no clue who the audience was. I had no clue if they had done any kind of training. It's running on WordPress, but it had like random announcements. Oh, this is the new list of the board, and sometimes it would be a page, and sometimes it would be a post, and sometimes it was an attachment. I couldn't find them all in one place, and sometimes it was like, here's how to intern, and it'd have a form, and sometimes it didn't. So again, maintenance means also training them in how to use the tool. So I sat down and talked to the law review editor, and he was a very ambitious guy who, I mean, I would check in every once in a while and be like, whoa, look at that. Oh, he's doing something really interesting. I didn't even get into that. So like Jetpack, for instance, lets you, if you're familiar with WordPress, you can have widgets in your sidebar. Jetpack lets you decide which widgets show up on which sidebar. So he created all of these like custom internal menus that would only show up on each section of the website. So if he wanted to have like resources for the editors, he could have a different sidebar menu that showed up once you got in there. So he had secondary level navigation, and I mean, the site works really well, and he did a lot of complicated work.
So
But
for you, WordPress is really about a way of making content presentable because you have the IR to host the actual.
It depends on the strategy for the journal. That's the only journal that we have that's in the IR at this point.
Okay.
The others are using the media library.
And you just upload the articles right into the WordPress.
Yeah.
So do you have any archival power there? Like, do you keep them over years for these journals?
All of the backups that I do include the files. So yeah, I have that. I wouldn't need to get the content a million times because they're not replacing it once they get it up there. And like I mentioned, these sites were super out of date. One of the problems our IP journal ran into is that the old version of the site was like an ASP or something like that. Obviously, there are very few law students who know how to write like access database ASP websites. So that got out of date. They moved it over to WordPress, but they hired somebody else because they didn't have internal support. So a number of these that I set up first were ones that I could import from an external WordPress site into my system. But then I had to figure out like, oh, they hired a designer, but the designer just like did not use child themes. I could tell once I looked at the code that they were taking a default theme and twerking it, but they weren't doing it in a way that it could be updated. So there were a lot of features missing, like menus. So I had to get some code and work with my student worker to compare side by side. This is clearly the code they started with. This is the crappy design that they have. How do I pull out those customizations so I can have that as a child theme, and from now on it looks the same. If they decide they want to have a completely different look, it's a theme. I change it out. So, yeah. Any other questions?
I
All right.
question, you talked about events.
Mm-hmm.
And are you tying all those events together to put on a main calendar, or is this just an option for each organization?
At this point, we don't have an event system set up for that. There is a main calendar for the school, and they are highly encouraged to put it into that. If I get students that really want to post a lot of events, for right now, it's basically just them putting up 3 posts a year for their major events. It's nothing super complicated. So we have been telling them, hey, do you want to get this on the main social media channels that their event is coming up? Do you want somebody to show up and take pictures? Like all of these things, you need to use the main calendar. I'm not setting up WordPress to be a competition to that. I'm just setting it up to be another way for them to promote it and put like, they could use that as the core content they're linking to, for example. But it's not hooked into that system. I don't have any like back-end admin control on the law school CMS, so if there is a way to hook it up to WordPress, I don't know at this point. And like I said, that hasn't been a big concern for a lot of these organizations. They're more concerned with getting their bylaws and their profiles up and things like that than using it for constant promotion at this
We use a
point.
WordPress calendar for our main calendar, but we can even I can even get another WordPress site to go to that calendar, so it's a separate WPMU site. I was wondering if you were doing something.
Yeah, like I said, I was an organizer at WordCamp, so unfortunately I didn't get to sit in on complete sessions a lot of times because I was bouncing around. But one of the sessions that was there, I'll send, if you like contact me afterwards, I'll send you the slides for it. I believe they're working on an API for WordPress that's going to let you do a lot more of like these things talking to each other kind of work. But it really depends on how you're, because WordPress isn't traditionally set up to do calendars either. You're probably using some other plugins and things.